I've done a lot of trips with the family, just a lot of good family time. So, with that, Matt will entertain you.
I'm going to ask to try and keep this under an hour. Okay? Given I love the 80s, it's going to be tough, but I'm going to do the best I can. You know, the 80s are what I like to call the decade of excess. We had Michael, we had Madonna, we had VH1, MTV, ESPN. The Tigers won a World Series, the Pistons won a championship. We had parachute pants, we had leg warmers, and we had, of course, the human league. And we had Reagan and Gorbachev. We saw the Challenger go up, and we saw the wall come down. But even though a lot happened in the world in the 80s, there was a lot that happened in the Coffey household. The decade started out with the last 4 of my parents' 5 children graduating. And this put an end to that tradition they had, that monthly tradition of tuition payments, which I'm sure they were glad to see disappear. But what it also did is it allowed more Coffey drivers to hit the streets. And as an unfortunate result of this, my dad got to meet a lot of policemen that he probably would have never known otherwise. But one of the bigger things that happened as we got into the mid-'80s is my mom and dad both retired. My dad had 29 dedicated years to the police department. And there was a lot of happiness with this. My mom was glad to see the midnight shift finally disappear. She hated it so much. She was so glad about it. And us kids, we liked it too because my dad wasn't on the street anymore when we were on the street. So that was nice to make us. But one of the downfalls of my dad retiring was the Toledo Edison Company lost their main source of income, as our household was no longer considered the less than of life once my dad retired.
Stop it.
And as we moved on into the latter part of the decade, as things happened, us kids grew up in the 80s, and we started graduating from college as Vince, myself, Dave, and Kathy all graduated. And as happens in families, you know, we moved on, and Vince and I both got married and moved out of my parents' nest, just to leave 3 remaining. But in my mind, there were 2 big events that happened that really epitomized the 80s for me. One was leaving our Oak Ridge house, and the other was my parents' silver anniversary. Now, leaving 4816 Oak Ridge Drive was a big deal. There was a lot of happiness there, a lot of sadness there. We left behind, as Dave mentioned, we left behind an acre of grass. We didn't have to rake leaves over anymore. But we left also a yard big enough to play ball in. We left behind a mile of driveway that we never had to shovel anymore. But by the time we left, we were all experts at parallel parking. And we left behind, as I noticed today in church, we left behind heated floors in the bathrooms. And that was a nice feature. But what we did gain is we gained air conditioning in the new house, which is something none of us ever had. And but finally, we left behind those dreaded black ants that we had everywhere. And we also left behind a living room furniture set that none of us, I think, to this day ever sat in, because we weren't allowed. but we also left behind a household of memories. And to me, given that that's the only house that all 7 of us ever lived in at one time, that is what I consider our true home. It was a big deal when we left it. It'll never be forgotten. And I can say I know everybody still drives by that house. It meant a lot to us. And we had to move on, but it was a part that I'll never forget in the 80s. But the last biggest thing is, I forgot to mention this. I skipped right over it. I apologize, Mom. As I said, my mom retired in the 80s also. And she retired from LaSalle's, Elder Beerman, Macy's, whatever you cared to call it, because it had multiple names during the 80s. And I think it speaks volumes that after close to 20 years, she was able to maintain her same job position, you know, through 3 different company changeovers. And one of the things I always remember is when we picked my mom up from work, like Dave referenced, we were always able to go up the back stairs. I always thought it was kind of special. We were a little above everybody else, because all your common customers had to go in the front entrance, whereas we were able to sneak up the back. But to me, I think the biggest event in the 80s was my mom and dad's silver anniversary. 25 years ago, we all gathered, a lot of us here gathered together for this. I remember it was a surprise party. And I'll never forget, I was telling Dave about this day, I think it was Dave, that we had it at the Willows restaurant. And I still remember we're going back. It was just us kids trying to get my mom to go back into this room. And she kept saying, I'm not going to go, that's the kitchen, I'm not going. Like, just go. You know, because that's where everybody was waiting for the surprise party, was back in that room. And so, anyway, to me, it was great that 25 years ago, we were all gathered here together in 1985. It's nice to see 25 years later, we're all gathered here again together. So, with that, I'd like to move it on to the 90s, what Kathy has to say.
All right, the 90s. There we go. Thank you, Ian. Techie of the family. The 90s, probably one of the things I remember about the 90s was this was the decade that every time I came home to visit from Columbus, I had to call Mom for directions because they were always moving to a different house every time I came home. I don't know how many had the 90s, but it was a bunch. But I think, to me, the biggest thing that happened in the 90s happened in 1995, and that was when Jody, the baby of the family, moved out, leaving Mom and Dad as empty nesters for the first time. Right? And I often wondered when Jody shut the door for the final time, what went through your minds? Did you kind of look at each other and go, we did it? And I hope you did, because Mom and Dad, you did do it. You sacrificed the first 35 years of your marriage for us kids, more than I think we will ever know that you did for us. You took 5 helpless little babies, you put us through 12 years in Catholic school, you insisted we go to college, you insisted we have good careers. 35 years later, those 5 little babies had turned into 5 happy, successful, educated, good-looking adults with lives of our own. So, and I sat there and I thought, you know, how do you thank your parents for 35 years of putting the kids before themselves? And I thought the best thank you gift also began in the 90s because that's when you became grandparents 6 different times. And there, you know, there's a reason they call it grandparents, because you get all of the grand and none of the parents. So you take the kids to the park, to the zoo, to COSI, you give them cake and candy, you give cake and candy, presents, and then when the kids have a little meltdown or a tantrum, or the grandkids have a meltdown or a tantrum, kind of send them off towards us with a little smile that says, haha, now it's your turn. So I just want to say, Mom, on behalf of 5 kids and Dad, thank you for giving all of us the chance to be able to say, now it's our turn. So with that, we'll move into the 21st century. So you think with all the activity of the last 40 years, Mom and Dad are ready to settle down? Nope. We're going to move to one more house. The house that they're in now, but thankfully, instead of moving again, they decided to remodel, redo their basement, and that started Dad's Super Bowl party. And this decade also welcomed 5 more grandkids, Jody, Dominic, Ian, Mary Kathleen, and Joanna, and 2 more weddings, Jody and Tom, Dad and Becky. And with everyone out on their own, you think the parents' work would be done, but nope, they still continue to help us. They help Vince with his basement, they go to Dave's kids' recital, they help Matt move a couple times, they watch Kathy's kids, they help me with my kids, remodel my kitchen, all of that stuff for sure and more. And apart from helping all of us, they've taken a new direction in their own lives. They've taken an active part in their new community temperance, the Temperance Action Committee. They've taken a renewed interest in their faith at Mount Carmel. They've made a lot of new friends in temperance, and then we've also seen Dad take on a political career with his emails. And so we come to the end of the last 50 years, but also the beginning of the next. To both of you, our thanks, our love, our best wishes for another 50 happy, healthy, joyous, love-filled years. You deserve it.
Salute.
Salute.
That's it. Let's see.
Let's see.